a broader societal good, not doing so much damage. So now we're seeing a pincer movement where the investment community was asking for more of this ESG focus, and now the markets are asking for more of this ESG focus.
So given WA Landcare Network is ethics and values driven organisation, what are the prospects from your view in finding ESG funding and partnerships that avoid the risk of greenwashing?
Well, that's a really good question. Greenwashing is very topical at the moment. And it stems from its human nature. So human nature, around boards in Australia and overseas, you'll hear this phrase, let's tell our story. And it's a reputation building, let's tell our story. And it's human nature to tell your story in the best possible light for yourself, right? So that's not quite greenwashing, that's simply, leaving out the bad bits and telling people the good bits. But you can see how without control of greenwashing, you do get people, companies telling outright fibs. Or somewhere in the middle, you might have PR divisions of a company, perhaps overstating or highly embellishing what they're doing in the ESG world. So this term greenwashing has become more prevalent, and the practice of greenwashing is more obvious these days. We're on the lookout for it. So that's the setup that we have. But what's really happening now is if I indulge in greenwashing and for the purpose of getting more of your investment dollar, and we talked about the investment requirement around ESG, then what happens is if I overstep a mark, if I greenwash, if I attract your investment by telling you little fibs, I am now stepping across a regulatory boundary. I'm now at risk of being pursued by regulators, and I'm at risk of significant reputational damage. I'm at risk of class actions, for example, as have happened around the world. So greenwashing is a threat, but companies are trying increasingly not to do so much of it. To really pull back, think about, can we prove what we're saying? You still have bad actors, that's still out there. So not all companies are taking it as seriously as they might. So the chances are good. I would say it's a case of being careful about what might be embellished in partnerships. So and one way to do that, the investment community has done this for a very long time. They will say, well, we will lend you the money or we will buy equity in your firm, but we want your ESG performance independently verified, as an example. So there are tools you can use, understanding that greenwashing is out there, understanding that companies that are preserving their reputation don't really want to embark on greenwashing. So the door is open for a conversation that says, well, how do we get third-party validation? How do we get independent validation of what you're saying about your rehabilitation or your water quality or your decarbonisation pathway?
What if WA Landcare is in partnership that has non-disclosure agreements? Will that gag us from talking about bad practices like greenwashing?
So the answer is it depends on the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement. And remember, it's an agreement. It's a two-way thing. So as a partner with a corporate, I would firstly encourage you to have a good legal look at any NDA. Typically, a company might give you an NDA and say, please sign this. It's perfectly feasible for you to say, well, can we add something, or can we make this a little bit clearer, or protect your own interests? So NDAs aren't a one-way tool. They are, in fact, an agreement, and you can have input to that agreement. So that's one way to do it. But there is an element of good faith in all of this. So, for example, if you're in a partnership with a corporation and you disagree with the amount of topsoil that they're using on their rehabilitation of the mine, that might not be a reason to go to the 6 o'clock news. You might actually have a conversation through their grievance mechanisms. So As you enter into partnerships, you can make the NDAs more flexible by discussing the agreement. You can also agree on, if you're disagreeing with things, what is the appropriate process to go through? What is the grievance mechanism? And remember, many companies will also have a whistleblowing policy. So again, that area is getting a little bit more sophisticated in terms of calling out bad behaviors.
Okay. So that sounds reasonable, but are companies actually accountable for ESG performance?
So I'll talk about accountability like a ladder, like rungs in a ladder. Okay. The lowest level of accountability is what the law says you must do. Right? If you're unable to do what the law says you must do, then clearly you're behaving illegally. Right? So that's your bottom level of performance. Now, at high rungs of the ladder might be adopted standards. So a company might say, well, the law says we should do X, Y, and Z, but we're going to do a little bit more for whatever reason. And a good example might be climate change. There are no specific laws about the rate of decarbonization you must have, but a company might say, we might decarbonize to 50% by 2035. So, and that would be a self-adopted standard or self-adopted measure. Right? So accountability, the lowest level of accountability is with your regulators. The next level of accountability is there is a little bit of market force around that. So if I say I'm going to decarbonize this quickly by 2035, but I'm not quite reaching that, then as long as it's not hidden, as long as people can see, stakeholders can see that I'm maybe falling short of the mark, then we're not hiding bad performance. We're opening up a conversation about how to improve that performance. And so I think as you think about your partnerships, remember that the bottom rung is always there. You should have a discussion with your partners about which rung of the ladder you would like to agree that you're going to agree on what performance looks like, and then you hold each other accountable.
Have you had experiences of ESG partnerships between governments, communities or NGOs and corporates that have worked?
I've been quite lucky to see some good ones, some ones that, because of the spirit of goodwill and the transparency between parties, has resulted in progressive outcomes over a period of time. So there are ones that haven't worked for good reasons, but I have seen them work, and I'm a firm believer. I always, one of my favorite sayings is that ESG is a team sport. I'm a firm believer that stakeholders working together in openness and transparency and with the best endeavors are likely to build enduring partnerships.
And how long do you think they do last typically?
I'll turn that question on its head. How short is too short? So ESG, by its very nature, whether it's environmental or social, tends not to be something that you see performance within 2 months or 3 months. If you think about biodiversity, you might need a couple of seasons of regrowth, for example, to see that your biodiversity is taking hold. So I would say be wary of short-term agreements that don't actually allow performance to be reached, whether it's water quality or biodiversity or decarbonization or whatever. I've seen partnerships last up to a decade. I've seen partnerships that have been renegotiated at certain points. So for example, KPIs, key performance indicators, haven't been met. So it's back to the table to have a rethink. How can we do this better? Is the partnership still working? And those are all done in the spirit of good faith.
So overall, you sound cautiously upbeat about ESG partnerships. Am I getting that right?
I do believe that to perform, to have ESG performance, it does actually take stakeholders to come together. Companies need to be accountable for their legal requirements, obviously, but in terms of performance in areas where stakeholders are involved, the more collaboration there is, the more likely you are to have better results over a longer term.
Well, let's hope ESG attracts more and more partnerships. And thanks so much today, Raj, for your time and sharing your thoughts.
You're welcome.
Hi, Raj. Thank you for joining us to talk about ESG.
Oh, there we are. There was Rail, Raj's wife, playing the role of me because I couldn't interview Raj online from wherever he was internationally on that day to get that clip. Now, I believe some people were having problems with the sound. I do apologise for that. The video can be made available to you to re-listen to it. And thanks to Deb Slater-Lee for introducing us to Raj, who's the family's a friend, and the knowledge and experience that he has in the space can be useful to us. He said he's happy to confer with us to learn more about those global partnerships, but he's working at that very high level. So if there's any questions for Raj, please put them into the box, the chat, and we'll make sure they get through to him. Our next speaker is going to pick up on one of the key elements there that Raj was talking about, the concerns that we have when we go into partnerships with corporates or bigger organisations, is greenwashing, and the risk of that's very topical at the moment. So we're very lucky today to have Clare Saunders from, Clare's a lawyer in the corporate and commercial team with the Environmental Defenders Office, and she's talking about what is greenwashing, how do we spot it, and what can we do about it. Over to you, Clare.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to try and share my screen. So can everybody see the first slide, which is the corporate greenwashing EDO slide?
No, not yet, Claire. It can take a little while to come up, but
okay.
Have you gone to the green share screen button down the bottom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then have a look around for the screen that has your slide on it, Claire, and then just click on that.
And it should open it up.
And then down the bottom it says share screen.
Yeah, so I've done that. Just waiting for it to share.
Okay, we've got a little hitch there, that's a shame. So let's try again, Claire. If you go to the bottom of the screen, the green button, share screen.
Yeah.
Then look up at the options that come up for you.
Oh, there we go.
Coming up?
Right.
Right.
So this one. All right, so can you now
Lovely, thank you.
see the title screen?
I feel cold already.
Good, okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today. I'm going to begin by talking about the work that we do in the corporate team at the EDO before providing some guidance on how to spot greenwashing and what you can do about it. But before I do this, I just need to say that the content of today's presentation is general legal information only, and it doesn't constitute legal advice. But if you do need legal advice, you can request that through the EDO website, or you can use the services of your preferred lawyers. So the corporate programme is run by the corporate team at the EDO, and I find a helpful way to describe what we do in the corps team is to think that behind every fossil fuel project is a company that's running that project. Whereas the core work of other teams at the EDO, like the gas team, the coal team, is to challenge government decisions in respect of those projects, the corps team focuses on the behaviour of the company behind them. So, for example, behind the Barossa gas project in the Northern Territory is Santos. Other teams in the EDO will challenge government decisions about that project, which they currently are, whereas the corps team interrogates the conduct of Santos itself. In fact, our client, ACCR, is doing just that in its greenwashing case against Santos, which I will get to later. So what is greenwashing? Well, you just heard from Raj that greenwashing is when a business or a company misstates or overstates or exaggerates the extent to which its product or service is environmentally friendly, which causes people to believe they are more climate friendly than they really are. And it can appear in various forms. We see it in environmental marketing claims, product labeling, we see it in corporate messaging on their websites, in their annual reports, in their climate change reports, adverts, and on social media. And as Raj said, it has arisen from the energy transition and the increasing demand for environmentally friendly products from customers and investors. A significant aspect of greenwashing happens within company net zero targets and plans, which is a big bulk of the work that we do at the EDO. In fact, 70% of the ASX 200 listed companies, which is Australia's largest companies, have some form of net zero claim. So why is greenwashing a problem? Well, by presenting false or exaggerated claims about their environmental efforts, companies can avoid taking real and deep and meaningful action to reduce emissions, which hinders real progress. So the first problem with greenwashing is that it delays climate action. Secondly, consumers and investors pay a price premium for an environmental benefit that doesn't actually exist. This in turn erodes trust in environmental claims. For investors, they can't properly assess the financial risk of investing in a company unless that company is transparent in its disclosure of climate-related risk. And it also skews the market in favour of companies who aren't taking climate action and away from those acting responsibly, which means that capital flows essentially in the wrong direction. And greenwashing is prolific. Last year, the ACCC conducted an internet sweep of 240 businesses across various sectors, and it was reviewing them for greenwashing. And of those businesses, it found that 57% were identified as having potentially engaged in greenwashing. So such is the scale of the problem of greenwashing that the regulators have made greenwashing an enforcement priority for 2022 and 2023. So that's the ACCC and ASIC. We've seen ASIC in particular ramping up its enforcement of greenwashing. You can see there the chair of ASIC, Joe Longo, saying that greenwashing is very much in ASIC's sights. So much so that in the last 12 months, ASIC has taken 37 interventions against company for greenwashing. This includes issuing quite substantial fines and commencing civil proceedings in the federal court. Now, these court proceedings all relate to the alleged overstatement of the scope of so-called investment screens or investment screening. This is where a fund says that it will screen out certain industries from its possibly responsible or ethical options, and those industries might be fossil fuels or tobacco or gambling or weapons. So when a member of a super fund, for example, buys into these options, they think that the fund won't invest their retirement money in those industries. Now, in these cases, ASIC alleges that certain statements made by Mercer and Active Super and Vanguard are misleading because those investment options included investments in industries that were said to be screened out. All of these proceedings on foot, so a result, or that they haven't been concluded, so it's up to the court to decide. So a brief lesson in the law now. So where an allegation of greenwashing is made, the allegation in the law is that a company has contravened the Australian consumer law or the corporate law. And they essentially say the same thing, which is that a person, who can be an individual person or a corporation, mustn't engage in conduct that is misleading or deceptive or is likely to mislead or deceive. Crucially for us, when that statement is a forward-looking statement, so it's about some future event, such as a commitment to achieve net zero by 2050, it's taken to be misleading if the person does not have reasonable grounds for making it. And this is particularly important, as I said, for net zero targets. So back now to our greenwashing case, which is the ACCCR in Santos. So the context of this is that companies are in a rush to make net zero commitments in the form of targets and plans. And that's to convince the public they're doing the right thing and to convince investors that they remain viable in the energy transition. The problem is that the targets are often not backed up by credible plans. So what do? Well, in August 2021, the EDO filed proceedings in the federal court on behalf of its client, the Australasian Centre for Corporate Responsibility, the ACCR, alleging that Santos engaged in misleading or deceptive conduct by making certain statements in its annual report and in its climate change report. There are three aspects of the claim. You can see them, the three of them up there on the slide. The first is that ACCR alleges that it's misleading for Santos to say it has a clear and credible pathway to net zero emissions by 2040. It's the first case in the world to challenge the veracity of a net zero claim and is important given the proliferation of companies doing so. As I said previously, 70% of the ASX 200 have made some form of net zero claim. The second allegation is that it's misleading to say that gas is a clean fuel. So at the time of filing 2 years ago, it was the Morrison government that had its gas-fired recovery policy post-COVID. This prompted a string of gas is clean claims by industry, despite overseas advertising standards regulators finding that such claims are misleading. So our client wanted to bust the myth that gas is clean fuel and to ask a court in Australia to determine the issue. The third allegation is that it's misleading to say that blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced by gas, and CCS, which is carbon capture and storage, has zero emissions. At the time of filing, the fossil fuel industry was spinning a big narrative around blue hydrogen being a clean fuel of the future, and that was to get support of policymakers and the public. And our client wanted to address this before Australia was locked into an economy which was built around another emissions-intensive fuel. And we have already seen the impacts of this case. So Santos has changed its conduct and has stopped describing gas as clean energy. That's happened across the gas market. So we've captured the attention of the boards. The Australian Institute for Company Directors includes this case in its supporting educational materials on how companies should disclose climate risk. And we've seen it inspire other actions internationally. So, for example, in 2022, Greenpeace France commenced proceedings against Total Energies for greenwashing, for alleged greenwashing. I'm going to skip that one. A significant body of our work is sending letters of complaint to the regulators, so that's ASIC and the ACCC, and also to WAD standards. An example is APIA's Future of Gas campaign, which we got a lot of inquiries about. So there was lots of inquiries from the public to the EDO, our corps team, asking us what we're going to do about this. So the APIA, which are now, they've rebranded themselves and they now call themselves the Australian Energy Producers, which is the peak sort of body for the oil and gas industry, are running a Future of Gas campaign. You may have seen it. So we complained to AD Standards and also to the ACCC about various claims that were being made within that campaign, including that gas is 50% cleaner than coal. And we said that it's misleading or potentially misleading because when you take into consideration the whole of the life cycle emissions of gas, it's not necessarily the case that it's cleaner than coal because of methane leakage. It also depends on the type of coal, the type of coal-fired power station, the composition of gas. There's lots of variables. So making this blanket statement, we say, is potentially misleading. We also said that the statement gas is 50% cleaner than coal only tells half the story. The other half of the story is that gas produces significantly more emissions than renewables. So another example of our complaint work is on ocean plastics. Here, the client is Tangaroa Blue Foundation, who I believe may be here today. And this complaint centered on statements on product packaging, that the packaging is made from 100% ocean plastic or ocean-bound plastic or words to that effect. There are many issues with this, but I'm just going to raise one of them. And that is that in the absence of any government-approved definition, industry does tend to create its own. So in this case, ocean plastic is defined by the plastics industry as plastic located within 50 kilometres of the shoreline, which essentially means any plastic that might have the potential to reach the ocean. We said this is potentially misleading because consumers would probably read that and assume that ocean plastic means plastic taken out of the ocean or found on the adjacent beaches. So we asked the ACCC to investigate whether or not that constituted greenwashing. So a big aspect of the work that we do, especially currently, is our super fund work. So as Raj said, Australians currently have about $3.5 trillion invested as superannuation assets. Some funds are invested in coal, oil and gas companies, meaning that many Australians have their retirement savings exposed to the fossil fuel sector. And many of these funds have themselves made commitments to align their portfolios with net zero by 2050, whilst continuing to invest heavily in the fossil fuel industry. And they justify this by claiming to take a so-called active ownership approach to their investments. So Hester Super Fund was one fund making those claims. And we wrote to Hester's trustees on behalf of our client, who was a member, setting out their concerns that its net zero claim was inconsistent with its continued investment in Santos and Woodside. This is because we said that neither Santos nor Woodside have credible net zero plans, and that's according to international bodies such as the UN and the Science Based Targets Initiative. These bodies require that credible net zero plans include Scope 3 emissions, that offsets are used as a last resort, and that there be no expansion of fossil fuel operations. So Woodside and Santos's net zero plans, they don't include Scope 3 emissions, which make up about 80% of their total emissions. Woodside's net zero plan is heavily reliant on offsets, and both companies are significantly expanding their oil and gas operations. So the result of our engagement with HESTA was that it put Woodside and Santos on a watch list as part of its active engagement policy. We replied to HESTA, raising concerns about its policy overall, its engagement policy overall, and said what we consider an effective engagement policy looks like. And we requested that HESTA implement one. So active ownership is the justification given by super funds for their continued investment in fossil fuels industry. They say that it's important that they remain invested because it gives them a seat at the table to influence climate action by engaging with the company and voting for stronger climate action. If they divest their interest in the company, then they lose the seat at the table. So what we've noticed generally as a general trend is that there is inconsistent voting practices amongst the super funds. So they vote against resolutions for climate action despite their net zero commitments. And we've also noticed that Woodside and Santos are quite determined to continue with their expansion plans, which raise the question whether any of this engagement is effective. Now onto this complaint. This was the Etihad Sustainable Flights complaint. So in this complaint, we asked the ACCC to investigate whether statements made by Etihad about the environmental impact of its flights and plan to achieve net zero by 2050 amounted to greenwashing. These advertisements were displayed at a soccer game on digital billboards saying, "Flying shouldn't cost the earth," and "net zero emissions by 2050, which were displayed alongside the Etihad logo. We allege that the first statement was misleading because flying with Etihad has a significant adverse environmental impact based on its current and forecast emissions. And we said that the net zero statement was misleading because Etihad did not have reasonable grounds for believing that it could achieve net zero at the time that the statement was made. We know that aviation is a significant contributor to global warming, and it's already contributed to about 3.5% to date. The Etihad complaint comes at a time when the aviation industry is responding to customer demand for more sustainable and climate-conscious practices, and it does this by making sustainability claims. So it's very important that these claims are properly scrutinised. So how to spot greenwashing? The use of broad and vague terms such as carbon neutral, sustainable, should be substantiated. So if you see them, you should ask, what is it that makes the petrol carbon neutral or the car green? How is the drink bottle biodegradable or the cleaning product eco-friendly? Claiming to be sustainable is completely meaningless without saying why this is true. For unqualified terms such as clean, free, and 100% recycled, if there is a qualification, is it in fine print or are you taken to another web page by asterisks? And does the qualification contradict the main statement? Is the fine print hard to find or is it very small? And if a product is plastic free, 100% plastic free, does this apply to the whole product or is there a qualification saying that it's just part of it on its lid? Another one is that advertisers use colours such as green and blue and animal imagery and nature imagery such as leaves and trees and animals to generate the impression that the product is environmentally friendly. Look behind the imagery and ask whether it actually is. Independent third-party certification trademarks can be useful, but only where the certification scheme underpinning the trademark is itself credible. We've seen an increase in certification schemes, including industry schemes or schemes based on self-certification, such as the definition of ocean plastic, that dilutes the usefulness of having them at all and confuses people. If you see a certification label, a red flag is if you haven't heard of it, or if you go online to check it out and it can't be verified. Where there is a carbon neutral product being offered, ask, is the entire life cycle of the product carbon neutral or is it just one aspect? If it's an electric car, is it advertised as carbon neutral? What about the manufacturing of the car? Is that carbon neutral? How was the steel produced? What about the battery? What does the carbon neutral actually mean? To what extent is the company using offsets? Overstating the benefit while omitting other important information may also be greenwashing. For example, the statement that gas is 50% cleaner than coal, emits important information that gas is significantly more emissions intensive than renewables as an energy source. So what you can do about it? Well, the corporate team at EDO helpfully compiled a guide to greenwashing, which is published on the EDO website. You can write a letter to the company asking for clarification of the claim, and this is all set out in the guide to greenwashing. You can make a complaint to the relevant regulator or to add standards. You can seek legal advice if you're unsure which regulator to complain to, because there is overlap. And you can seek legal advice if you are considering commencing legal proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. If you'd like to just stop sharing your screen and we'll come back and see our audience. That was amazing. I just learned so much then, and we've all been taking notes, some of us, but we will be able to share your slides with the audience afterwards. There's a couple of questions for me, but first I'd like to hand to Peter, who's put a question in the chat. Do you want to ask the question, Peter, or Claire? Yeah, please.
Sure. So Claire, thanks for your presentation. So we're a representative organisation, and in probably the last 18 months, we've seen increasing demand from regulators and project proponents to verify their ESG claims in relation to specific projects. For example, the sustainable harvest of timber. This is placing a huge demand on our organisation, and that's very little consideration is given to that by the people asking for that assurance. Is that something you're seeing elsewhere, and is it something you think regulators need to be more aware of?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the companies that we're sort of dealing with, they don't tend to, or we don't tend to see them making the argument that it's that I guess the need for them not to greenwash is placing an unnecessary burden on them. But we're talking huge fossil fuel companies, and so that resources isn't an issue for them. What we have seen is that there's currently a reform of legislation that's going to be requiring companies to disclose their climate-related risks. Currently, they don't have to. It's not mandated. Some of them do, but not all of them do. And so one thing that we've seen is that the smaller companies are sort of complaining about the extra burden that it's going to place on them. But that's a sort of a slightly different thing, because we're talking about companies here. I think it's definitely something that the regulators need to be aware of, because you know, being certified and making these disclosures in a way that's sort of meaningful and sort of avoiding accusations of greenwashing, I say, is something that they're probably not aware of, and I can see definitely an issue for you. Yep.
So I was probably coming from a different angle, in that we've got no issue about talking about the ESG outcomes of our projects. It's where we're asked to almost provide project assurance verification for others. For example, on Wajari country, there is a bucket load of blue gum plantations. We're now seeing companies asking us to assure them around the claims they make on the ESG outcomes of their harvest based on, say, the EU's regime around sustainable harvest. So it's at the community representative level where the burden can shift. I don't care what it costs a Rio or a Woodside or whatever. I'm talking about at the community representative level who's asked to play a role.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, well, it's obviously it doesn't matter what Rio are asked to pay, because they can pay probably no matter what. Yeah, I mean, that was also my point. Sorry, I probably wasn't that clear. That if it is placing an unnecessary burden on small community organisations, that's probably something that the regulators aren't aware of, and it's an unintended consequence. And so it may be worth you writing to the regulators to make them aware of this issue. Yep.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. And there's a question from Freya at Gillamai. Are you aware of a list of credible ESG certifications in Australia? And Freya's saying, imagine how long it would take to do a weekly shop, you know, to work your way through.
I don't know. I don't know of a list of really the problem with the space is that there's now so many kind of certifications out there that it's really, really confusing to consumers about which one's credible and which one's not, and the schemes underpinning them. unfortunately, really what it means doing is doing your own homework. So jumping online and having a look at these certifications and then doing your own research around them. As I said in my presentation, a red flag is, firstly, if you haven't heard of it before, industry generated ones tend to be, they can raise a red flag, because there we have a kind of an echo chamber. You have, I guess you have the that company being sort of judge and jury. Yeah, and if you jump online and you see that there's sort of no real verification, or it's very shallow, or it's very vague, then that's probably one to avoid. Yep.
Yes, and a question from Keith at Gondwana Link.
You want me to ask it?
You're there.
G'day, Claire. That was great. I'm just curious, and it relates to some phone calls this morning, as to whether the same standards of honesty and transparency that ASIC and so on apply to corporates applies to NGOs. With the fires on in New South Wales at the moment, there's a big scurry on where people can get help for wildlife. Some people would have seen the Saturday paper story on wires today, but I suspect we all know of other examples. NGOs aren't very good at admitting failures. So same standards apply?
I don't, well, I've got my legal brain on now, and the law is that a person must not engage in conduct that's misleading or deceptive. So the question would be whether an NGO constitutes a person under the law. I don't know whether that's true. I don't know whether that's true. So I don't know whether that's something that is for ASIC or the ACCC.
Or the ACNC, Keith.
Yes, indeed.
Wonderful, thank you. Any further questions from the floor for Claire? Just jump in if we can't see you, if you have your hand up. No, and if not, Claire, I just want to say that was quite, it was deep and it was quite emotional. And I know that sounds funny, but it's that sense of hearing the stuff that inflames us, you know, that we hear about the greenwashing and you get sort of this angry response. And then there's you guys and this sort of really intense action that takes place that, you know, can hold people accountable. And there's a sense of real relief there that, you know, there's action being taken that can create these companies to have more accountability, because really we're being deceived, aren't we? And my question is, how do you get funded? Are you government funded and donation funded?
Yep. Yep, we are, yeah.
So that's something for people to keep in mind with their estate planning and anyone else that they're looking for to donate funds to, because you guys are doing an amazing job. And is there cost to lodge a complaint with you? People have asked me that in the past.
So when you say lodge a complaint, is that to sort of get our advice and sort of us drafting a complaint on someone's behalf?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So our work is either low fee or no fee. And so we are a community legal centre, and we have charitable status. And so we do completely rely on donations and some grants from the government. But what that means is that we provide our legal services. It's an access to justice issue. It's providing legal services at a very low cost or no cost for people who otherwise wouldn't be able to access justice. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And there's some comments there saying to keep up the awesome work, and very comforting to know that you're out there. So big thank you to Claire, who's got to leave us now.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much from the entire sector, to you and your team for everything you do for the environment.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, so we're moving along. It's a change of pace, really, to hear about an organisation that until Keith introduced me to Annabelle, I didn't know existed. And it was really quite refreshing to look at a whole new stream of potential people for the environment to partner with to help them address their need for environmental social governance. So Annabelle Sides has joined us from Victoria. I'm going to pop your hand up there, Annabelle, so everyone can see you're there. And she's a regenerative sport practitioner and founder of the Green Planet Sport, an organisation that aims to help achieve a climate future that we can all be happy and participate in, build partnerships that have climate positive outcomes for the health of people and the planet. She's passionate about ecosystem restoration and biodiversity projects in a sporting context. So she'll be presenting on leveraging the professional sports sector for the environment. Thanks, Annabelle, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Jack. It's really, I'm very happy to be here. I've got a bit of a cold, so please bear with me. And I know people have questions about sport and sponsorship, and so maybe we could talk about that at the end as well, because it's a bit of a dance with the devil scenario. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I live on land that marks the boundary of the traditional meeting place of the Dja Dja Wurrung, Taungurung and Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people at a place called Nanganalong, which is known to a lot of you as Hanging Rock. And I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to this land's custodians, their wisdom and knowledge of caring for country. So I'm going to talk about the possibility of partnering with the sports sector to play for the planet. We have this sort of meeting of moments to place professional sport, athletes, teams, events and organisations in a position to feel not only compelled to be able to take, but also be able to take action on climate change, pollution and biodiversity loss. So I'm going to try and set up a bit of a recipe for you as to why sport provides possibility to support environmental work and how you could possibly engage with this. So sport has worked in the S&G of ESG for a really long time, and E is a new and growing space for many sports, following on from some really early adopters and a growing need. And this need's driven by both public sentiment, legislation, positive commercial partnerships that are leaning into this space. And I think probably the most recognisable of these is, hang on, I'm just going to change my view, I can't change my screen otherwise, sorry. Okay, there we go. So the most recognisable of these is that in real time, where, how, when and who plays and how we do business is being impacted more often, with more severity across all levels of sport and all landscapes. And these images are just a few of the impacts that we've seen in sport over recent years. Now I'm just going to share a little video with you from the IOC. This takes a little while to load. This is what I call an inspirational sport video. And there are so many of these I could have shown you. If you Google sport and climate action, you can find similar videos, and sport is really great at putting these together and telling a story, but sometimes not so good at portraying the depth of the reasons behind an inspirational video like this. So I'm going to try to do that now and tell you a bit about the why there's potential that could be realised. Now, research in the US is showing us that we can bypass someone's resistance to environmental messaging when it's delivered through their sports team. Teams are full of athletes and they're influential and marketable. With a smartphone in your hand, you can like, follow, find out more and share what they do and what they say. And millions upon millions of people do. These are just Insta stats that show you from around the world you can see how much of a following that there is. And it shows us that athletes, sports events, organisations, brand or broadcast shows passion for something and they can evoke this passion in others. We start to see stories that unfold of David and Goliath proportions in sport. And when someone wins, it's like we've all won or we've all lost, which is a bit ironic when we think about the climate crisis. We've also got this position where athletes are finding their own voice and founding organisations like Frontrunners, Footy for Climate, Cricket for Climate, Surfers for Climate, Protect Our Winters, and all of these are encouraging support for climate action. So it's not only passion that we're seeing. We've also got this authenticity. Authenticity is something that people really want to be part of. And the realisation that sport can be so captivating has led to the UN and the IUCN to develop frameworks to help put the E into ESG for sport. Interestingly, the Sport for Nature framework, which came out last year, has the sole purpose to deliver transformational nature positive action across sports by 2030 and beyond. There's also a unique commonality we have between the restoration sector and the sports sector. And it was identified in a report in 2022 that commonality is trust. People trust sport and not-for-profits, which includes most environmental organisations more than any other organisations in Australia. So we have this time where we can bring sport and environmental organisations together. So we can find ways to mobilise more people in more places more often to act for nature through sport. And at the same time, sport can learn a more regenerative mindset and to how to reconnect to nature. There's a couple of other things that we see across organisations, and that's purpose, strategy and commitment. People who care and people who get it. And they're sort of some of the things you need to find success in this space. Finding common ground around values and goals is also really important. And landscapes, I think, are a really good place to find that common ground. Sports played across multiple landscapes like oceans and waterways and mountains in cities and on turf. Just as restoration and conservation occurs across those many different landscapes. So I thought I'd start by talking to you about oceans. The Ocean Race is one of the first organisations that's really been built around purpose, and they race with purpose is their sort of motto. They educate and influence political will, and they do restore nature at the harbours where the event's held. They also have this really unique science program. And why I wanted to talk about this is that's one of the things I've heard from the restoration community is there's sometimes a lack of data to build a case study for species and ecosystems. So the Ocean Race goes through some of the most remote parts of the oceans that are rarely accessible for scientific research. And as they go, the teams and crew gather valuable information using a custom designed onboard science program. The data collected provides leading science organisations across the world with valuable information, and that helps to paint a more accurate picture of what's happening in the ocean in real time. So I guess a question that some of you could ask yourselves, is there specific data that you need in a particular landscape where a specific sports community that also operates in that landscape could help? The next one I wanted to talk about was the WSL, or the World Surf League. And I wanted to focus on something that's unique to them, and that's funding and foundations. And that's something else to look for in a sport. The WSL has a not-for-profit arm called WSL Pure. and it activates a lot of their environmental and social impact work through the WSL Championship Tour. They use the WSL One Ocean brand at each tour location to engage fans in an event-based activation. And they do this by funding local not-for-profit organisations aligned with the WSL priorities of coastal restoration and conservation, eliminating plastic and taking climate action. And the activations work in a couple of ways. They don't only provide funding to accelerate work on the ground, but they also provide a tangible experience for athletes to take part in event activations. And tangible experiences for athletes in the mix are really important. Engaging athletes increases the chance of a ripple effect across broader society. Some of you may be aware that WSL One Ocean had an activation in the Margaret River leg of the tour. It was a dune restoration project, which a lot of people on the call were probably involved in. And you can find out more about what being involved in this experience was like from those organisations who took part. Another example I wanted to give you was the Richmond Football Club, and they've taken another approach again. They're part of the World Wildlife Fund World Without Nature campaign. And one day in the year, sports remove their mascot from their emblem and they raise awareness about the plight of their mascot. And in this case, it's the tiger. The club's expanded this to raise funds for Indigenous rangers in a tiger protection project in Malaysia. And they've done this through a tiger membership that can be purchased as an add-on to their current club membership or as a standalone membership, which attracts new people into the club who might not want to be a full member. So green ticketing and green membership is another way to raise funds for environmental activations. A tangible athlete experience also took place for players to visit the park as part of the project. It not only provides really good content, but it helps athletes become better spokespeople. And they become better spokespeople for the heart of their team, the Tigers, for Tigerland and for the Tiger Army. So there's probably a whole lot of other teams around Australia who could take part in the World Without Nature campaign, and that could support Australian species who are their mascot, who are also species that some of the conservation organisations on the call or around Australia are looking to protect. For sports, a project like this also empowers fans and builds momentum within the fans for another passion that brings them closer to the club. So it's sort of got a twofold effect. The next example I wanted to give you was cricket, and again, play a short video, which some of you may or may not have seen before.
One way to help reduce climate change is to regreen Australia. As trees grow, they absorb harmful greenhouse gases. So for every 4 runs scored by the Australian men's cricket team this summer, Four Pines Brewing Co and Landcare Australia will plant 4 trees, committing to plant 44,444 trees, making a real impact for a real good cause.
Now, I really love this video because it's of the people who are involved in it to make it happen. You've got an athlete with purpose, Pat Cummins, who has co-founded Cricket for Climate. So he's a really strong voice in this program of work. You've got the amazing Cricket Australia marketing team who's made a great video. That's something that sport can help with, putting together that sort of content. You've got a commercial partner who this matters with, and that's Four Pines Brewery. So they're a climate exposed agribusiness. So there's something in it for them as well. And they've actually gone on from this project to run a series of other projects across other organisations that is connecting that sport back to their natural environment and planting more habitat for different species. And you've also got an environmental partner, which is Landcare, and they could actually deliver on the restoration of habitat. So the project was restoring habitat for black cockatoos in South Australia. Another example I've got is of a specific athlete, Rydian Cowley. Rydian is a dual Olympian race walker. He's got a strong lived experience of competing and training in poor air quality and in extreme heat. He's the joint captain of the Australian Athletics team and a member of the Athletics Australia Athletes Commission. He's an ambassador for Sports Environment Alliance and some other organisations around the world, and he's an employee at Bush Heritage. And why I think this is a great story is that just a couple of days ago, he was the recipient of the IOC Athlete for Good Award, and he received $20,000 US for the organisation of his choice, which was Bush Heritage. He is an athlete whose ongoing support of climate action and sustainability, and really being an all-round good human, is reaping rewards for himself, for his sport, and a whole range of other people, including environmental organisations. And if you want to look up World Athletics, it is probably one of the biggest leaders in this space. They're looking at all different groups that they work with within their sport, including Pacific Island sports and the plight there. They're looking at loss and damage. They're looking at clean air programs, and they're looking at engaging their athlete community to help them become better ambassadors. And my last shout out is to these two guys. Now, golf can get a really bad rap regarding the environment. But I think it's probably one of the most powerful places to work with for nature if you can find the right people. And I'm happy to answer some more questions about that shortly. But this is Ian and Grant. They have taken wholeheartedly to rewilding the Woodend golf course. Grant's a superintendent and a horticulturalist who's a good person to have on your team. He's really open to new ways of doing things to protect what the club sees in a community public golf course as a community resource now and well into the future. There's so many other examples I could give you. Wimbledon's biodiversity plan for pollinators. There's loads of work happening in golf and F1, which might be surprising. Sebastian Vettel's has had a huge program for climate action and also for the protection of pollinators and bees. The FIFA Women's World Cup had a rewilding football program. Water Polo Australia has an amazing social impact approach to this work. There's the Paris 2024 Swimmable Seine project, Brisbane 2032 coming up, and you can see the commitment of the IOC. The AOC is a signatory to the UN framework, which is the Australian Olympic Committee. So we can expect to see a lot of Olympic sports coming online into this space over the next couple of years. There's so much diverse work with different streams, and I've just presented a few of them. But be mindful that none of this is black and white. Greenwashing and sanitising of oil, gas and airlines in sport does happen. There's a high consumer of single-use plastic like soft drink and water through brands like Coke. There are efforts to change this, and there's some really good examples of that happening both in Australia and internationally. Some sports are obviously adopting this new type of work faster than others, particularly those that have already made a commitment, because they are at risk of greenwashing, and the EDO has developed a guideline for sports. And there's also, when you're thinking of doing this work, a willingness to innovate and be playful and have fun, I think is critical when working with sport. Sport's really full of tenacious, driven, playful and interesting people from all walks of life. Any level of sport can act for nature and a better climate future. And in the worlds of the International Olympic Committee and the Olympic movement, they say we are stronger together. So sport might be in the business of people, but you are in the business of regeneration, and sport needs you as much as you might be able to capitalise on being involved with them. And this last image is a group of my friends from Water Polo, and we've done a couple of We Play for the Planet initiatives. So I'll stop sharing my screen now so I can see you all again. And happy to answer questions.
That was fabulous, Annabelle. Apart from inspiring, it was so informative and just opened my mind up completely to the opportunities that hadn't been aware of or considered that were there. So there's a story there about sport wanting to be accountable at some level around the impact that they're having on the environment, because we know elite sports travel a lot. The teams are always flying around the planet. Do you have an example for us of say a small community group that you're aware of, or a medium-sized one that's sort of partnering in a local context with sport to do something?
Yeah, so Woodend Golf Club is probably a good example of that. So the club, along with Woodend Landcare, put in an application to the local council, and they received a $10,000 grant to do the rewilding work and kick it off. And since then, the club's actually made a commitment to purchasing more plants through the local network and keep putting those in. And the first planning we had to do that, and I think Kate's actually on the call from Environmental Golf Solutions, but so Kate came along to that activity and really talked about how golf can change the way they do things. And we had people come along to the walk along to have a look at what the potential was, from neighbours, council, two Landcare groups, just interested members of the community, members of the golf club, myself, some kids, and we had those same group of people at the planting days. So I think that's a good example that you can do this work at a local level. Sometimes it's hard to visualise what it might look like and meet the right people. And I think if you get pushback right from the start, it's probably not a good fit. But there are people who really want to try and work in this space. And part of the challenge for sport is actually finding the ideas and finding the people to work with as well.
Thanks, Annabelle. Look, we've got a comment from Kate in the chat saying that, you know, sports is, as you said, we've got to watch out in partnering with sports. There's greenwashing going on there too. There's intense pressure from sports in Perth Metro to convert bush forever sites into active sports facilities. Do you really think that the very persuading publicity by sports about rehabilitation and rewilding is justification for leveraging more loss of natural areas?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I think there's been talk at a high performance level of sport about that competitiveness for those spaces. And I think that there's going to be a switch in what that looks like. So council drives that sometimes as well. So what's the population growth of an area? So council wants to provide facilities for people. Sport wants places for more people to play. But in international context, there's actually been a lot of protest. And so I think sport and council perhaps is getting the message that you need to do that either in a really considerate way for the environment. And even the International Olympic Committee has said that any new Olympic bid has to have almost, I think it's 100% brownfield sites. So you're not allowed to build new facilities if you want to host an Olympic Games. So it's passing that information on to councils, communities, and now the sports community in Australia, which is growing in this space, to bring in awareness that, you know, creating greenfield sites has a whole lot of other repercussions, and that those repercussions actually impact the existence of sport, so that participation. And some of the protests we've seen is actually activists planting trees on golf courses. In the US Open, there was the Extinction Rebellion through paint onto the court. And even then you could see the athletes saying, do you know, if this is the only way they can protest, I'm fine with that. I don't like that it's disrupted my game, but it impacts me that I'm playing in heat. It impacts the future of our sport. We want to see change. And I think the athlete voice is becoming stronger in that. So absolutely there's pushback, and people should be pushing back if that's happening as well. Hope that answers the question.
I think so. Yes, Kate said 100% brownfield sites, and that's something for us all to be aware that if you agitate for that, that's an important thing. We've been joined by Deb Slater-Lee from State NRM program. Welcome, Deb, as one of our major funding bodies. You popped a comment in there, Deb. Would you like to speak to that?
Sorry. Oh, hang on.
Lost her for a minute to resolve her feedback. Deb's comment was...
Someone was asking about the promotion with Cricket Australia and Toyota, and you know I think that the Environmental Defender's Office just released a greenwashing document for sports, and there's been some documentation come out that just helps sports look at the partnerships they have. And you're right, a lot of advertising dollar is spent on the advertising, and like I said, these inspirational videos need to be substantiated as well. So I'm not really familiar with how many trees have gone into the ground as part of that AFL Toyota partnership, but Toyota is also a sponsor of the International Olympic Committee, and their sponsorship of sport is huge. And there's been a couple of reports, blood, sweat and oil, that have come out that are starting to look at the negative effects of being associated with those sponsors. And in Europe and the US, there's a couple of examples I noted down before when the EDO's officer was speaking, Claire. The Oslo Bislett Games actually divested from all oil, coal and gas sponsorship because they were getting such pushback, and they changed the entire way that the transport happened for those games. And they've got a different tiered approach to sponsorship where they've got more second tier sponsors, and they have kept the Oslo Bislett Games as its own entity. So they haven't given away the naming rights like AFL Toyota Grand Final. They haven't given away those naming rights. And Climate Pledge Arena in the US has also done that. And the Ocean Race has conscientiously done that. So they used to be the Volvo Ocean Race, and they are still sponsored in part by Volvo for a specific element of the race, but they don't give away those naming rights anymore because they want to be their own entity.
Thank you, Annabelle. There's another question there from Emily, who's our colleague at the Northern Territory Landcare. Hi, Emily. Your question was, is there funding? Do the sports partnerships come with money for the grassroots to do on-ground work?
It is a growing area. So the funding comes at a high level. The sports funding will come from their sponsors at the moment. So like Toyota's providing sponsorship for putting trees in the ground or plants in the ground. But I think that's something that will grow. So as sport diversifies their sponsorship, and golf's probably a good example of that, where they're actually providing some of their big corporates are providing funding for pollinator projects. And I think there was a comment about that into the in the chat. Yeah, so I think maybe not yet to the extent that we would like to see. That's why I talked about WSL as well. So they've got their own foundation that provides funding for organisations at a not-for-profit level to do the work, and that will increase as there's more commercial partnerships that are built on these relationships and through foundations. So Tennis Australia has a foundation, and sports are starting to set up these foundations so they can take grant money and then deliver it into either social impact or environmental impact areas.
Fantastic, Annabelle. We've got one more question. I'm just conscious of time because you've got to move along. But if you've got time, what could be the role of local government in working with sports events like triathlons, particularly events that capitalise on the natural surroundings to attract participants? Great question.
So there's at a local council level, if local councils have environmental management plans that are looking at cleaning up waterways, there's definitely a partnership that could happen to amplify the messaging that goes with cleaning up those waterways. And so in Melbourne, the Birrung River has a swimmable Birrung project, and we're looking at ways at the moment of involving sports into that messaging so that they can actually speak for the river. So the Birrung or the Yarra River moves through Melbourne, and a lot of people use that for wayfinding. It's a backdrop to a lot of our events. The AFL longest kick with Fox Footy was held across the river. But there hasn't been that connection. This is a really important place, not just for the tourism and the backdrop, but it's also important for urban cooling and biodiversity. So there's definitely more work that can be done through organisations like City of Melbourne or other local governments. But the Paris Olympic Games have actually restored the Seine to a point with community support that they're going to be able to have open water swimming and triathlon in the river. And the legacy of the Games is that river will be open for public swimming sort of post 2024 for a long-term future of public swimming. So there's definitely a role, and it's finding the right people to make those connections and those partnerships.
Can I just add something quickly there, Jack, if that's okay?
Sure.
There's an ex-colleague of mine on the call that works for the FNQ Dry Tropics Partnership in Queensland, and she was part of a program where we worked with Ironman cans in the GBR catchment to simplify and identify their waste streams from that event and to reduce and reuse, recycle and upcycle and repurpose items from that event. We worked with Ironman for over 2 of their events, and we were able to significantly reduce their waste that was blowing into the Great Barrier Reef from their their event. So that was a really positive way to be able to work with the local council, their sponsors, and a major sporting event as well. So it is possible to do.
Yeah, and Western Force has done a huge amount around hydration. So hydration is a big thing for sports because there's a lot of single-use plastic. And I think the more advice and information they can have helps them because they want to work in this space. But Western Force has actually been doing a hydration program where if you go and play your game with the Western Force, you have to use the big coolers that are provided. You can't take single-use plastic bottles in as a away team. And they've also done that on the concourse. So I can't remember what it is, but it's thousands and thousands of water bottles have been not used. So, and their waste diversion has increased as well. So it's definitely examples. And so if you can think of ways of doing it, definitely approach major events because they want to do this work.
Fantastic, Annabelle. Thank you so much. And look, I've had comments from my team in the background that there's opportunity for more workshops next year, not just about this whole topic, but about the specialist areas within it, because there's just some amazing things happening and some great examples that we can learn from. So we hope to have you back in the future, Annabelle. Thank you so much for joining us today and for the work that you're putting in to bring sport into this consciousness where everything needs to be about the environment at all times, not just something that we do occasionally across particular sectors. It's everyone's responsibility all the time. Thank you so much.
Lovely. Thanks so much.
Bye for now. Okay, so we're moving on to hear first of our case studies now from our inspiring thought leader, Keith Bradby, who's the CEO of Gondwana Link and known around the country and around the world as someone who's really pushed ahead and created an example of what you can achieve through partnerships. So Keith's going to share with us his key learnings spanning 20 years in the environment sector, presenting on navigating philanthropic and corporate partnerships. I think it's longer than 20 years, but we won't hold you to account for that, Keith.
Yeah, you're right. But look, before I start, I just want to say it's great to be on the same podium as Annabelle. We've been talking for a while. And I also wanted to slip the news. I suspect there's going to be an international tourism gathering in Perth next year. And like with international sports, it will have a significant sustainable tourism element to it. Now, I'm just going to fumble with the electronics for a minute. Here we go. Right, we've got the right screen up. Yep, so here I am down in Albany on Menang Noongar country, and my good friend up at Kojonup, Craig McVee's done a painting here which, my family's got 170 years in this country, so we know stuff all. And I live in a part of the world where we're still cataloguing what's here, let alone understanding it. And I think it's important to recognise that. Oh, this is interesting. Here we go. Yeah, you're right. It is longer than 20 years. When I started thinking, I put up 30 years. And I think my job is to give you a very simple, straightforward A to B line on how to do this stuff, and then you can go out into the world that is far more complex and confusing. The 30 years ago was actually working with Alcoa. They used to run a fantastic Landcare program right through the wheat belt. Think what you like about Alcoa. I can't sing the praises of how they operated in Landcare strongly enough. And I was working on the coastal plain in the Peel Harvey, and they were both a corporate and a neighbour. So we had to think through what that meant. And after a few years, we talked them to also run a coastal plain program and a grants program. I still think it was the most effective grants program I've ever been there. Some of you have been driven mad by grants. Yep, they're clunky. But, we got the applications in, we assessed them within the week. We had a big dinner with people from the community, and they were sorted. We also restructured it in year 3 to encourage cooperation between the groups, and that was pretty important. So here's a picture of me fundraising. It can be quite fun. At this stage, I didn't have much idea how to do it, but I met someone who did, Peg Olson, who lives in Albany, but Albany, New York State, works with the Nature Conservancy. And she was my navigator for the first few years and my door opener. And they're both important phrases in this context. Peg, who is a lifelong friend now. This thing works on friendships a lot. Peg had some other friends who were interested in what we're doing in Australia, and found the initial money that got us going. And sorry, where was I? Oh yeah, I wanted to briefly outline my perspective and experience is probably very different from a lot of the individual groups listening in today. We try and work across lots and lots of groups. We have worked across lots and lots of groups. And fundraising can be a competitive business. That's the main point I want to make. Our determination from day one was to work largely with private funding and complement, not replace, the government funding that groups were already achieving. As the first speaker says, Raj, goodwill, generosity and goodwill underpins a lot of this. With the philanthropic world, goodwill, good humour, good luck, you name it. We started, the essence of our program, some people would say, is a bit like mustering cats. How do you get lots of groups to work together? It's quite easy. You need some cat food. Brings them all together. And I'm not being cynical, I'm being, I hope, realistic. The initial significant funding that Peg and the Nature Conservancy provided did attract a lot of groups into the program. And for probably our first decade, we were able to maintain good collegial cooperation across large and small groups. And they fundraise together. Nothing is more effective than if 6 organisations go genuinely arm in arm to a funder and say, we're going to do all this together. Will you help us? That, I think the reality of the NGO world, perhaps the larger NGO world though, is that you've got reasonably high level of staff turnover, transient professionals, and you've got distant boards who don't necessarily have the close relationships the rest of us have. So joint fundraising for almost a decade, significant wins, very large amounts of money, but it frays at the edge. And part of that fraying, I've got a biased perspective, is that you've really got to invest in quite a lot of effort in keeping it all together. We also learned about the diversity of values in any collective environment. One of the NGOs involved had from the very start made it clear that they would be chasing corporate funding for their roles in Gondwanli. And when they landed an impressive 6-year arrangement with Shell Development Australia, but a hit the fan. Other NGOs weren't happy, and it nearly blew us up. But in the end, a simple deal was brokered whereby that NGO and Shell could proceed in a subset of the overall program that kept everyone else's logos away from the Shell logo, which is what people were fearful of. We also helped have a lot of corporate visits from Shell over those years where they came down, they met. For those who know the Nownup property and the Nownup program that Eugene Eads runs, Shell was pivotal in establishing that. They brought down their 2 bus loads of their entire corporate executive and senior staff, I think 4 or 5 times. It was a very genuine experience. There's a bit of truth telling, lots of tears, and whether or not we actually changed greenwashing from Shell, that's another discussion. But we certainly did change a number of the individuals involved. Similar corporate involvement from Wesfarmers, which didn't seem to get everyone quite as upset. Key lesson we learnt there, I've already used the phrase door opener. Gavin Bunnings, the ex-chair of Wesfarmers, wrote Wesfarmers a letter asking them to contribute. That worked well. It is about those sort of networks. And again, there were some genuine friendships that are ongoing and a bit of broader support. A lot of variation in how those 2 companies operated. We've also encountered corporate carbon efforts that didn't connect at all with community and had an overly strong focus on dollars per tonne. We've done a bit of good by providing some assistance there and getting some properties, one in particular south of Pingrup, that should never have been opened up for farming. The original farmer fought hard to give it back, and that's now been replanted. But very little, if any, connection with the community. And Freya and Ash know who I'm talking about. Now, I thought it'd be safer to use some New Zealand examples, but to try and see this sort of stuff from the funder's perspective, I've done some work over there with groups and with the Tyndall Foundation. And it is a reality that discrete projects are very attractive to funders. They've got clear start and finish. That's what you're going to do. But it also may not be how we change the world. And Tyndall Foundation, to their credit, wrestled with that question and ended up setting up a program called Reconnecting Northland, which they fund in 5-year tranches with evaluation through them. And they, not only that, but they brought in other funders. So instead of us ratting around like we do in Australia to try and bring funders together, Tyndall did that work. And I found that very, very impressive stuff. But I'd add that after a few years, there started being turf wars between some of the main NGOs, and there was some pretty petty local jealousies and some clumsy individual stuff happened on the ground. In the end, we now have 2 great programs happening in Northland, Reconnecting Northland and Kiwi Coast. And people here might think I'm a troublemaker, but over there, they've used me as a mediator. I just wanted to note we have some ongoing funders who help keep John Wannelink afloat, as well as a few individuals and a couple of critical foundations who like their anonymity. And in that greenwashing discussion, I meant to mention earlier, we've also had significant funding and still get some from 3rd generation companies, i.e. the family foundations that have been funded by companies that you may not like, the grandchildren. And there's another moral dilemma you can think about. We try hard not to compete for funding with groups working across the link. You get accused of it anyway, but I do want to keep stressing that it can be competitive, but the future of landscape scale change is in making the cake bigger, not fighting each other for slices of the cake. It's hard, like it is for virtually every Landcare group. It's hard for us to keep the core program going. And over the last few years, we've focused in a lot more on where we think we can be most effective. We're not trying to play with every player, we just can't. but we've thought through who do we have long-term relationships with, who have we trusted for a long time, who has demonstrated reciprocal relationships over a long period of time. And that's our circle of influence. There's lots of other good things happening in various parts of Gondwana and good on them. I'm at the risk of boasting. Our last 2 financial years have been our most effective. We've across, in addition to lots of other things we do, we've helped facilitate some 18.4 million hit in the ground. And these are Teflon fingers. They're not sticky ones. And that's also been a critical ingredient in achieving that. Carbon is another critical ingredient. And, you know, I think that the stuff from the EDO is really important. But for me, for us, carbon is both an enabler and an end product. A lot of what we've been able to achieve is happening because we are also achieving tangible conservation, cultural and community benefits that investors and funders can go and look at, they can walk on, they can meet the people, which to me is the highest level of accountability there is. So here's a few overall observations, and that comment earlier that maybe we need to sit down for half a day or a day with some of the specifics from this morning. I also feel that. Everyone's bagging corporate funding, but come on, you know, if you took money from the Morrison government, the same stuff as far as I'm concerned, same dilemmas. And while people do focus on the source of the funding, the conditions that come with it are critical and vary enormously. So, you know, keep an eye on the fine print and what's expected with you. Recognise that there's significant diversity across corporate Australia, from people I wouldn't touch with a barge pole to people I admire greatly. And, you know, there are private companies out there. There's lots of choice. Don't think you're locked into picking up money from the first one to knock on your door. Personal relationships, philanthropy, and corporate funding. A lot of it runs on personal relationships, trust, who knows who, networks, door openers, and all that. I've already said that it can be competitive. There are sharp elbows out there. NGO fundraisers get paid on what they achieve, not what we achieve together. And that helps fracture things a bit. I have been physically elbowed away from donors at functions and all sorts of things. And I use the term vacuum cleaners and cane toads. Beware the people who walk into the room and say, let me suck up your ideas and I'll then put them together in a package that will help you. Or those who walk into a room like a cane toad looking for what they can eat to make themselves bigger. And logos. Let's not even start on who's got the biggest logo. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to go quite there. Operating continuity and trust that Landcare groups have is important. And we are at an important change time. The world is hungry for the big, bold, and the authentic. I'm absolutely convinced of that we're seeing a quantum change happening. I did want to very quickly talk about Yunjidup wetlands, which is one of the projects we helped with over the last 12 or 18 months. Wilson Inlet Catchment Committee ended up saying, yeah, we can raise $500,000 in 18 months. No worries, we'll buy this critically important wetland. And so far, after 9 months, they've raised 600 grand and secured the wetland. And Sean Ossinger from WIC gave a wonderful talk on this in Albany last week. We need to corner Sean at some point and get that discussion. So in terms of Landcare groups, as Sean said last week, This is a social science, so think hard about it. It is all those things about what messages resonate and all that stuff that ecologists like to ignore. This is the critical stuff. Be local and start local. Sean, I think, hoped I would deliver him a list of funders. No one delivers a list of funders. But I did say, start raising money locally. They raised their first, I think, 130 grand locally. And then the bigger funders got interested because they had demonstrated capacity and so on. Have a tangible goal. Buy a block of land, whatever it is. You know, it's worked for the Twin Creeks people of Crongrupps. We've also helped the Chittacooping, the Bush Blocks Guardians, who've raised 340 grand in, I think it was about 4 months. As you develop relationships with donors and funders and corporates, they will then start thinking about your core needs, but rarely will they initially. The people who can help you are the notable people in your community, and there's more there than most people realise. You need the endorsement of significant people and door openers. You don't necessarily have to do all the asks yourself, and that's sometimes very hard for a lot of people, but there are people in your community, in your committee, who have networks and who can open doors like Gavin did. Sean used the phrase last week, he was quite shameless about the publicity they went for and the magazine stories and the newspaper stories. He's also married the right woman who is really good at presenting and packaging stuff. So there's one tip. And local Landcare groups have something that other groups don't have, and use it. You know, you're authentic, you're local, you're cost effective, you're the community face, and you know who to trust and who not to trust. So that's some of what I've gleaned. We are, oh no, that's right. Don't assume any system works well. Don't take it too seriously. I'll put these two websites in the chat so you can download them, but a lot of you have really wrestled with lots of this, as has everyone else around the world. So let's laugh about it occasionally. This same organisation has come up with the concept of beer as useful. That's beverage to enhance equity in relationships. I'm a big believer in it. So we're about to launch our next fundraising drive. There it is. I hope you can all contribute and help in some way or another. This should really pull people in. And just to finish, I just want to put a slightly controversial bit of thinking up there for all of us at this critical decade in what is termed the climate and biodiversity emergency. It's a bit challenging to think about what we should be doing and what we may be wasting our time on. And I just saw one question pop up from Emily. Yes, we have DGR status, and if you're going to fundraise, you need DGR status. That's me.
Marvellous, Keith. Thank you. There's another question for you here. Do you have any thoughts on the large entities coming in with their ESG-driven initiatives and environmental work with little consideration of including the community at the grassroots level? Really important.
Yeah, absolutely sucks. It's not ESG. It's them trying to get their product for as cheap as they can. We've probably tolerated more of that in the past than we have. It is now time to play hardball with them. Yeah, and there are some shocking examples around. I won't, Freya may have something to say, but I can remember in the Peel, Telstra or Telecom sponsored a works program for unemployed people and launched it with a magnificent dinner with prawns and lobsters flown in and all sorts of things. They need educating. They got it that night.
So there's so much there to unpack in what you shared, Keith, and there's some some golden bits and pieces there, but the thing that I'm going to put up on the wall here is big, bold and authentic. And that's the power of community land care. It's the power of the movement that we really need to harness. Thank you so much for that. Keith, there is another question there, if you can see that in the chat from Ashley.
Oh. Sorry, I'm just getting back to the chat.
That's right. How do you play hardball? Yeah.
Yeah, well, well done, Ashley. That's good. Number one, just remember how absolutely significant you are and how important you are as the locals. And if you're being offered crumbs from a rich man's table, just don't take it. In the case of someone arriving, I now regret a number of times we haven't gone to the media with some of these obvious violations of how to operate decency in a community. And I think Clare's talk earlier on has made it clear that there are nowadays a number of supportive and sympathetic people out there who will listen and who will take up your case, if you like. So connect with others is the best I can do. I know it's different.
Well, and there's Freya's got a question for you, Keith. Can you see that one?
Yep. Give landholders the priority. 15 years ago, you would have been really lucky to snaffle the right a larger corporation. I think I'm tangling myself. I think the role of a local group is to put the locals first. And it is difficult out there, and it is one of those topics we should chew on together a lot harder, because we've lived in fear of what's called the carbon bulldozer for the last 15 or more years, and it hasn't really happened, but it probably has in some communities, and we need to counter it. I do also want to say that one of the biggest impediments to good planting programs now are the new planning laws that each council has set up, which I think is an overreaction from the farmer-dominated councils to the changes that their district needs to be sustainable, and they're using the fear of the corporates coming in to drive that. It's now almost harder to plant a big block of bush than it is to clear it. But Freya and I need to have a coffee when she's in Albany next, and we'll talk tactics.
We all need to have a coffee with you, Keith, because you truly are, an elder of the movement with tremendous experience, amongst others on the call, but the courage with which you've pushed through and the learnings that you've been prepared to share with us today are invaluable. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and that was very good. You could do well in fundraising if you can compliment people like that. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you. And keep putting your questions in the chat, because we can forward them to Keith, because I hear on good authority he's got nothing else to do. You got a standing ovation from Warwick Boardman then, and that's the first one I've seen of those on Zoom, so well done. I'm going to hand over to Peter Badnell now, who's very kindly joined us from Dadarak, Native Title Aboriginal Corporation. Peter is also a practicing lawyer with extensive international experience working with government and communities in the Asia Pacific region. Peter's sharing a case study in co-investment, drawing on his grassroots experience with the Esperance Native Title Aboriginal Corporation. Thanks, Peter. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. And it's really nice to be here. And while we're sort of complimenting Keith, one thing that was missing from his presentation is when I share the case study of, I guess, what we've been able to do in this space. Keith is very firmly at the centre of the Venn diagrams of personal relationships that have enabled it. And so Keith's observations around how things can get done in this space equally applies here. Also, so I'm the CEO of Esperance Dalarak Native Title Aboriginal Corporation. We hold and manage the native title rights of the Wajari Noongars, who had their native title recognised in 2014-15-ish. I don't normally do these types of forums because it's really important to us in terms of the authenticity of what we do, that my First Nations colleagues are out the front of talking about what we do and what their aspirations are. Last year we employed over 80 individuals, which is about 38 FTE, and we're always at around 85% First Nations employment outcomes. And so in terms of that authenticity bit, ensuring that that we really are an Indigenous led corporation and majority Indigenous participated corporation is very important. But you're stuck with me as one of the minority non-Indigenous wadulars in the organisation. So I'm just going to share my screen now of so this is I'm just going to share an example of sort of what we've been able to commence working on with an ESG focus, and I guess draws together a bit of Keith's observations. And then I'm going to quickly talk about what we're planning to do next in this space and how we're approaching it. There's a number on the call who have probably heard a bit about the Dalarak Ranger program in the last sort of few months at a few different forums. So I'm not going to go back over how we approach our Ranger program and some of our organising principles. Instead, I'm just going to focus really on I guess our particular ESG focused or enabled projects. The major one being coming up to 18 months ago, we were able to purchase on market, and that's significant. So this was a property that was for sale on the open market, and historically there have just not been enough sort of models that have enabled First Nations groups to participate in that open competitive market. But we were able to on this occasion, and we purchased the property that was then known as Sadi Farm, which is now reverted back to its original name of Cartagena. And it's shown there in red. It's a 4,000 hectare property that was used for about the last 70 years as a broadacre cropping and livestock operation. It has about 3,500 arable hectares. It's located directly adjacent to some high quality bushland. You'll see on the screen there's a reference to Cartagena National Park. That area of bushland is subject to Wajari native title rights, and the West Australian government has put forward a proposal to incorporate it into a national park. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to go anywhere, but regardless, it remains high quality bush under some level of protection. And so Cartagena is adjacent to it. For the Wajari people who I work for, it's located within what we know as the Ben Werenup Cultural Corridor, which is a huge transect of land that stretches out to the sea and islands. I won't talk to the cultural values of the Ben Werenup Cultural Corridor. That's much more appropriately done by a Wajari elder. But essentially we were able, from the back of this purchase, to form a program that we've launched only softly at this stage. A more public launch is coming later in the year off the back of having 3 foundational partners, but it's what we call our Rejuvenation Trees program. And essentially it's going to be an offer to the wider world to join with us in healing country together and healing Wajari songlines. And we'll talk more about that. But this program and the impetus to work with others to purchase it comes off an assertion by this organisation and our members that traditional owners ought to be the major landowners in their country, and that for Wajari Noongars, the recognition of their native title didn't achieve that. We can go into all the reasons why, but a lot of the themes may be familiar to people on the call. And so a couple of years ago, that assertion was very firmly made. And so then we looked to opportunities to see how we could bring it about. And so we worked with some partners, and again, these were based off personal relationships, outfit called Odonata Foundation and Carbon Neutral, where moving very quickly, because this property was on the market, we managed to form a syndicate of investors who still expect a healthy return, but they're investors who are prepared to take extra risk and be a bit more patient than off the back of the ESG outcomes that can be achieved. Essentially, the impact investors were formed. We purchased the property under Esperance in Esperance Dalaruc's name. We've then initiated what we call a rejuvenation project, which is the environmental to a biodiverse standard of, at this stage, around 2,000 hectares of the 4,000 hectare property, where we are actively restoring the property to match the surrounding bushland. And the remaining 1,500 arable hectares will be, we'll explore some regenerative farming outcomes over time. Off the back then of what's selling, what we're going to be asking the market to buy is a rejuvenation tree, which is essentially a plant-a-tree model. We aim to pay back the debt we owe against the property, as well as fund its restoration. Apologies for the picture of a koala there. That's probably a nod to our eastern states-based partners. And importantly, the carbon sequestered through the biodiversity plantings, they sit within Dalaruc, and it's that future revenue source that we plan to underpin our operations as a charity to deliver outcomes back to our community. Off the back of this, there was a second property purchased in similar circumstances at the same time as this one, and we now have a third property under contract that we're trying to raise finance for. We're evolving our model now in that we are now trying to include some bank debt into our financing model to, to pay a bit less in interest and to see if we can broaden out its applicability. So the project itself at Cartagena, we were able to purchase this property because it's not the most desirable land in Esperance. It's worth about $750 an acre compared to the $8,000 acre property that's going around here. And I think that's relevant in terms of being able to try and achieve these things at scale, just the demand for agricultural land and some of the challenges to actually doing this at real landscape scale. And it also comes with enormous operational risk in terms of the rainfall area. We're 70% down on annual rainfall right now. It's been 3 degrees hotter on average this year. And we're also, of course, learning from 70 odd years of rape and pillage, the soil is simply toxic in places, all presenting significant challenges for our biodiversity restoration, and all the more reason why we need to have active and authentic lines of communication with our supporters around, well, this is the reality of the crisis, right? And these are the realities we have to grapple with if we are going to actually change some things. And there's just a message from Gail, our chairperson. Importantly for us is, so we think the policy ground is shifting a fair bit, in that the last 20 to 30 years, the whole policy in relation to, I guess, closing the gap has been around training and employing Aboriginal persons and business procurement. We think there's a growing recognition that those sort of initiatives have been important in their own right, but on their own, they won't close the gap. We also need to tackle structural barriers like land ownership and access to finance. And so we would see our rejuvenation trees and the model by which we've achieved these outcomes as being right at the cutting edge. But of course, it is imperfect in that the title to the land is held at a community organisation, not at an individual family level. So it's very important for us that we see outcomes down in the individual family level. And really, for us, we can do that through having confidence that we can offer long-term employment and business development to our employees and members of the community through the land enterprise and restoration economy outcomes or opportunities of seed collecting, seed processing, planting, and all those things. So the last year we direct seeded and hand planted seedlings around 400 hectares, and that involved about 30 First Nations persons, from whether the direct on-ground works to some of the marketing and some of the monitoring and evaluation. It's amazing how the dynamic changes with other interested parties when you're the landowner in terms of access to other opportunities. So we managed to team up with Curtin University around seed viability testing and seed processing. There's a young lad pictured in one of these photos who we sent up to Curtin to do some training. And he after the training, he recounted to me how he could recall in year 10 geography giving up and deciding school really wasn't for him. And so for him to reflect on what it felt like to be engaged in two-way learning with professors and PhD students, based on the real application of science and environmental restoration on a property that he had a huge stake in, I guess really reinforced for us how powerful the model is for us in terms of engaging our community in the endeavour and the whole restoration economy. Some philanthropy has assisted us. We managed to raise funds for the equipment purchase of a tractor and direct seeder, which significantly de-risked the operation and made it possible for us to do a lot of the work directly. I should just say this project is within a much bigger endeavour related to the Dalaruk Healthy Country Plan, which again, some of you may be familiar with, and working across multiple cultural corridors. So and of course, at the heart of it must be about the outcomes we're achieving at the individual level, and there with a number of my colleagues who are involved in the project. So what's next for us? So we intend to, we want to go again with our model. We've got an enormous amount of work ahead of us in the restoration of this property and with further acquisitions that we'd like to do. But more generally in relation to ESG, we see the opportunity to try and bring together a fair few of the threads that we're working on into coherent models. And so the cultural corridors is the model by which we apply a cultural lens to what we do. And this is just one example of a different cultural corridor within Wajari country that we know as the Kepwari cultural corridor. And it stretches all the way inland from the greater Marbalira area all the way out to the ocean. We have a concept around almost vertically stacking a lot of different things within that corridor that enables interested ESG type supporters to almost pick their own adventure within that corridor, whether it is in relation to, say, a wildlife sanctuary up around Marbalira, or whether it is in relation to catchment health and Ramsar wetland health, whether it's regen agriculture, whether it's carbon, whether it's traditional foods, right down into commercial and economic development joint ventures. We're really hopeful of soon being able to announce a aquaculture and marine science precinct based on land that the group hopefully will own. And so really the cultural corridors is the lens and the authenticity and the relevance to the community. But then within it, there's lots of entry points for interested ESG type partners. So that's increasingly how we're going to be trying, I guess, to take advantage of the opportunities out there in the ESG world. So I think that's probably it from me, Jack.
Fantastic, Peter. Congratulations. I mean, the scale and the partnering and the social outcomes just phenomenal. And that's a beautiful blend of what can be achieved with ESG input, obviously at the right scale. I've written down so much from what you said, but I love the concept of pick your own adventure. You know, when you're doing a landscape scale project, we know that philanthropists have all their own different things that they're looking for, and you're making that available. And not all of us, of course, are working at scale, but there's lessons and models there that I think we can work up to share with groups that will be applicable. Got a question there from Freya. Have you had a chance to have a look at that, Peter? Just about the competition that, you know, happens from broadacre farmers when we're reclaiming land and putting it back to its natural state.
Yeah, there was a former agricultural minister that wasn't happy about it in terms of how much she thought should go back. Look, I think there's again, the properties that we focused on have been on the market for a while because they're more challenging properties. We've had to go at a number of others that are more sort of higher rainfall, more productive properties, and we've gone in with really competitive subject to finance offers, and we've missed out because the neighbouring, you know, our offers get shopped. There's a dynamic between, you know, the real estate agents in these towns who sell the farmers all their products and services. You know, it's a really difficult dynamic to work through. And yes, that must be causing, you know, some to be upset. I think the ag community in Esperance has seen a lot of, you know, schemes come and go, and so they're pretty skeptical of anything that's not broadacre cropping, and particularly because the broadacre cropping is so profitable in this part of the world. You know, the blue gum's been a good example, but we are actively trying to incorporate other agricultural type models in what we do, because the reality on Cartagena, the carbon returns alone don't stack up in terms of being able to pay back debt and acquire. So we've got to look at other sort of vertically stacked income producing opportunities. But obviously for our authenticity and for the organisation as a whole, they've got to be consistent with our caring for country values. So look, I think we're still too small to be a threat to the big landowners. Certainly, we're really hopeful that we can play a role in some research and development around how to restore the highly degraded areas. If we can do that, and in particular around some direct seeding techniques, hopefully there'd be a lot more access to country for restoration.
Fantastic. And do you think there's a flow-on effect when, you know, those farmers buttressing up against those properties start to see that rejuvenation and the return of the pollinators and the animals? You know, do you think that there's a chance that they will amend practice or talk to you about adjusting the style of farming that they're doing?
Hopefully. I'm realistic about just how profitable they are. You know, there's not a lot of impetus to change, I don't think, in this part of the world for them. And I think the agricultural community is pretty good at investing in research and development and getting around some of the challenges. So hopefully, but there's a long path ahead of us. You know, honestly, some of the land at Cartagena is toxic, and so we've got a lot of work to do to show that we can restore at that sort of scale and find different ways.
Yeah, great. Look, I've just been reading some stuff. I followed up from a program where there's a plant being used in southeast Queensland. My parents used to have a property there on a market garden. It was really toxic. It had potatoes grown there, so it had all the yucky stuff in it, and fantastic success with 2 crops of this plant in terms of removing. And you know, there might be some good information there for you.
That's really helpful. I mean, I should think the other thing we should say is we also want to harness a little bit the great empathy that our elders have for the farming community, in terms of they recognise there's a connection to country, and I think actually we've probably got a lot more work to do to pull out that empathy, so there can be a lot more sort of sharing around different relationships with land. So I think, you know, we see the farming community as being really open, I think, to what we're trying to achieve, and we think with a bit more work we'll find some really active supporters out there.
Fantastic, Peter. Any more questions from the floor? There's a comment there saying thank you for openly sharing. That was very generous of you and Keith. We've got a few minutes before we close. I know how precious time is, and we have been sitting for a couple of hours. So if we don't want to use any more time, that's fine. If you had some thoughts about a resource pack, what we thought might come out of today, and I'm starting to think it may be a little bit early. I think we need some more conversations because there is so much to unpack, so many opportunities for WALN to develop some resource kits for people on how to get started on their ESG journey, or if they're further along, what might next steps look like. So any thoughts anyone wants to share? Case, what do you think about that?
I think that we could put together a bit of a survey after the forum and really tailor that to try and get some of that feedback and see what people would like the next steps to be from this, because it's been an incredible turnout and we've heard from some amazing people, but it's also very deep, and that dance with the devil is hard to navigate at that community level. So I would like to be able to support you through that journey as much as possible. So perhaps getting feedback afterwards might be a good idea.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Mary.
A question for Peter. Is there hope that all your restoration and revegetation work will help restore some local rainfall?
Yeah, gosh, well, I hope so. I mean, that's been the experience of regen sort of farming elsewhere, hasn't it? Wouldn't that be great? I mean, we're also, with our partners, I think, have some really interesting work around how you can increase the water holding capacity of soils as well. And so I think some of that's potentially really interesting around, say, how the less valuable or less productive farming land, say around salmon gums, what sort of soil amelioration techniques can be brought to really improve the productive capacity of that soil. And I'm speaking outside well and truly my area of expertise. I'm just sort of parroting what our partners say. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see over time what are those more profound landscape changes, including rainfall.
Peter, I just wanted to say how impressive I think your vision and strategy is around the work that you're doing. And it was really exciting to be down on country a couple of weeks ago and be able to work out with your rangers. I think it's really cool that you're looking at it to package up opportunities. You're really like making it very easy for investors to come to you, and you're selling what you have, which is a lesson, I think, to everybody.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. I mean, that's the intent. I mean, I don't also want to gloss over how challenging the operations are. I mean, and essentially anyone who works in regional communities, dealing with the issues of intergenerational trauma and disadvantage, we're only starting to get confident about maybe venturing out into the wider world because we know there's a level of integrity behind what we do, but that's really hard won and can't be taken for granted. Our focus has to be back internally in our community and making sure that they're leading the charge on these things, not someone like me just out the front of it.
Yeah, and the investment that I saw in the training and opportunities that you're giving or providing for the rangers there is inspiring. It's amazing.
Thank you, Casey, very much.
Colma.
Thanks, Jack. I was obviously, like everyone today, thank you to all the people that have presented and also the effort that went behind to get everyone here today. But I was wondering if I could add one more job to your list, Jack, and that's to add even more value with the recording. Is it possible just to list the presenters and the time their bit starts? That'd be lovely. Thank you. If you get the chance.
No worries at all. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. Can I say that? We understand the value of that sometimes you just want to grab a snip of a 2.5 hour thing and you don't want to have to play all the way back through it to get to what you want to see. So that's great. Anything else from the floor? Oh, Mr. Bradby, can't get away with putting that in. You have to ask the question.
I'm not sure if it's a question, but we'll see if we can turn it into one. I just wanted to add that there is that concern out there that those bloody environmentalists and those bloody black fellas are starting to grab land off us good solid farmers. The reality is there's a lot of land out there that is not that flash for farming, and some of it right on the edge is becoming less flash, and there is no government program to restructure properties, and that's a big deficit, I think, from the government's point of view. And the second thing is, you know, I think on current projections, the wheat belt will have one farmer by around 2050. It's becoming socially unviable out there. We're losing a third of the farmer population every decade, and have for 3 or 4 decades now. So what's happening at Carter and at properties like Now and Up over this way, and with Eddie Way on, who I think's online and so on, is actually part of a social revival in these rural areas. And I'd like social and cultural revival, but it's bringing people back into landscapes where farmers have been steadily leaving. And that's a real bonus for all this work.
Wonderful.
And Peter can elaborate on that. There's my question.
Peter, no, I completely agree, and thanks for sort of always elevating it to that more strategic point. That's right. Our native title holders here are deeply connected to place, and as I hear from them always, you know, healthy country is healthy people. It's their interacting in with the landscape. So you're absolutely right, Keith.
Terrific. Now, there's been a theme running through today because we've talked about, you know, global structures. We've talked about $3 trillion, which is a stupefying amount of money sitting in super funds for ESG investment. In real terms, there's probably no shortage of money. But the theme that we've heard, and that Deb Slater-Lee commented on, and we might drop down to her in a second, bring her in from State NRM, is that it's about people. And when I first met Keith Bradby, who I had on a huge pedestal before I met him, quite frankly, and then I realised he's just a human like everyone else. He's not really, he's quite amazing. But it was that landscape and Landcare is a people business. The land and the environment exist and always have done and always will. It's people who change the landscape. And we do that together. We do that through relationships. And that's been a really recurrent and important thing today, is that we need that time, and we need the resourcing, we need the skills and the expertise to build those relationships, to develop those relationships, and to construct partnerships that are functional and that work. And so I just asked Deb if you're available there, sitting there with Natalie. Do you want to jump on and just share your thinking with us?
Oh, we're off mute. Yeah, look, I think it requires a little bit of a mind flip to look at what the work that we do across Landcare and also NRM activities. Really, we wouldn't exist if it is absolutely a social construct. The thing that holds us together is that we all care about that brown and green and blue stuff out there passionately. But ultimately, the way we're effective is through people. And I think that requires a little bit of a paradigm shift sometimes. Absolutely. As a scientist myself, I believe in the science to support all of that. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a network, if we don't have that social construct and we don't understand that, that's problematic. So I feel very passionately about that part.
Thank you, Deb. And I do think it is one of the huge strengths of the sector, is that we talk, we share, we collaborate, and we want to continue to be able to do that for you, with you, alongside you from the Landcare network. And so if there's nothing else for the forum today, what will happen next is, in terms of questions, Casey will forward out a summary. I'm actually going to develop up, I've given myself another job here, but I think is worthy of a communique about what we've heard today, to start to synthesize some of what's occurred and what we've heard, and that might help us inform our survey. So you might get a communique and a survey in the next week or so, just to help us really shape what happens out of next steps, because we can't let that $3 trillion go begging. It's in cyberspace, and it's absolutely meaningless if it doesn't turn into stuff that helps people to help our environment. So thank you, everyone. And any last calls from the floor? Don't want anything left in the room. If anyone wants to share, say, comment, critique, feedback. No? Great. Well, Casey and I will stay on for a moment. Lovely comments in there. Thank you, everyone. Really important that we get a survey feedback from you that Case will send out about today too, about the session, so that we can continue with our funding. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye for
everyone.
now.
Have a great day.
Keep doing
Bye,
the
all.
great stuff. Bye, Keith.
See ya.
Thank